All right, it's time to talk about setting. We already talked about world building. Let's talk about settings in particular, like specifically, okay? And these may be fantasy settings. This may be a romance book. It can be a mystery book. It doesn't really matter. But I encourage you to research settings and form a complete thought and description of those settings. So a setting isn't always just a backdrop to the action. Um, you can actually your setting can actually create action. It creates movement if you do it correctly. I recommend taking a few of the settings that you know your characters are going to be in a large majority of the time and actually writing detailed descriptions. Picture it in your mind. You might even want to draw a floor map or have a map of the area. One thing that I think I hate the most is whenever there's this, crazy detailed fight scene, but it seems like it's just happening in a blank space. You know, is it a cobblestone street where they're fighting and they might, slip on a stone that's loose? Are there stairs? Are there other citizens walking through the street as they're fighting? Are they in an alleyway? What does that setting look like? And understanding that at all times your characters are interacting with the setting. So you can't, yes, they're interacting with other characters, but the setting is part of it too. And you have to find a way to incorporate the setting into the action or movement of the story instead of just describing the house was green. You know, maybe the character walks up the front porch steps and she looks at the color of the house and says, "This green reminds me of my childhood home," or this shade, or however you want to go about incorporating it into your prose. But it shouldn't just be an info drop. Like whenever somebody walks through the room, it shouldn't be two paragraphs of just what the room looks like. It should be your character kind of describing that space to you as they're moving through it. And so if you already know what that space looks like, that's great. If that space already exists, like if it's a historical place or a place in your hometown or another town that you visited, or maybe it's just a generic place like a diner, and you have one or two in town maybe that you're saying, okay, maybe if these two were combined together, it would be something like this atmosphere. Go take pictures or look online and see if there are pictures if it's in another town. Um, do your research. Get a floor plan or look at photos online and save those as you're doing your research so that whenever you're writing in that setting, you can pull that detail up and have it kind of in front of you so that you're thinking about it, you know. One of the things that I try to do whenever I am outlining certain settings is I try to utilize the five senses because you are experiencing your setting through those five senses. So sight is an easy one, what they see and incorporating that, colors, light, dark, shadow, anything you can incorporate for, what you see with your two eyes. That's the easy one to do. The other ones start to get a little bit more tricky. Sound is a little bit easier. What do you hear? Like I had said, a cobblestone street. So do you hear, carts and wagons, the clip clop of horses' hooves and the sound of the wagon wheels going over the cobblestones? Is it a more modern setting where you hear, cars driving down the street, they're honking their horns, the taxi drivers yelling out the window, a car backfires, what are the sounds that surround you? Or are you in a busy, just a busy room where you hear a lot of mumbling and a lot of talking, a lot of hushed voices? Smell, if you're in a restaurant or an inn, maybe you can come up with, the smell of stew roasting over an open pit fire, restaurant smells are pretty easy. But whenever you get into some other areas, might be a little bit more tricky. I mean, if you're going to maybe a dusty, dingy inn, you might smell stale floorboards that have been marinated in rotting ale, or they're rotting floorboards, and so they have this musty smell to them. Maybe there's smoke in the air because, the guy in the corner is smoking a pipe. Maybe you got a little bit of body odor because, these are all mercenaries and they don't regularly bathe. And so it smells very ripe in there. You can incorporate some of those things. If you're doing an urban setting, a modern setting, maybe it smells, like we were talking about the cars. Maybe it smells like exhaust, I don't know if you know the different, like in the city, like maybe you smell, the exhaust. Maybe you walk by an alley and there's, like week old garbage there and it kind of smells. And so that can, maybe that pungent aroma comes across your character's nose. Maybe they're out in the rural area and they smell cow manure. Or maybe it's in the middle of harvest season or growing season and it smells like fresh pollen in the air, or they're in a garden and it's fragrant flowers. Those are some things to think about on your setting, and it brings your reader in. They know what some of these things smell like. Like if it's a real garlicky smell, I know what that smells like. I can incorporate that, and it brings me into the story more because I feel like I'm there. Now, one of the harder ones, let's see, we have touch. Okay. Touch can be a little bit more difficult, Sometimes when I'm visualizing a scene, I kind of close my eyes and I put myself in where that character's at. Maybe it's nighttime and it's a little cold and they forgot their jacket and so they get goosebumps, So that's kind of a touch. Maybe it's a hotter setting and their skin, is getting hot. Maybe they're getting sunburned, they're getting sweaty, the sticky humidity. Those can all be things that they feel. Maybe if you're on a sandy beach, you have that gritty feel to the sand as you're walking through the beach barefoot. You step on a shell and it's a sharp feeling in the bottom of your foot. That's something you can incorporate. The last one, taste. Again, if you're in a restaurant setting or an inn setting, sometimes it's easier to describe, that cup of ale or the rack of lamb that they're eating rather than any of the other five senses. But there are other things that you can do. Obviously, sometimes the strong odor can manifest as an actual taste. And so, maybe I go back to that pungent rotting garbage, maybe it almost makes them, kind of gag or almost throw up because of the smell, or maybe it's rotting meat or something that's just really gross. But there's sometimes, maybe, on the other side, maybe you've got a sweet scent in the air and it makes you think of chocolate or something. Strong chemicals sometimes can, how whenever you come across like a really pungent chemically smell, sometimes it burns your nose, so that could be a smell, but then it also kind of maybe leaves a taste in your mouth, and a burning sensation maybe in your throat. And so those are things that you can incorporate. If there's, like, let's say your character's stuck in a sandstorm, they feel all this sand, this abrasive sand on them, but maybe they're getting in their mouth and in their nose and their eyes, that affects everything, but you taste this gritty flavor in your mouth, or gritty feeling in your mouth. Same thing if you're on an ocean setting where everything, smells kind of fishy, right? Maybe that fishy smell can be almost a fishy, like a salty taste, right? So the the ocean breeze blows in and like salt from the sea gets deposited on your lips, and then the character licks their lips, and it kind of has a salty taste to it. There's a way to incorporate all five senses. If you get really creative, like I said, if you can close your eyes and picture yourself in that space, even better if you can actually, if you can go to that place and sit there and close your eyes and focus on what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, what you touch. Um, you can write all of that down in a detailed description, take some pictures, and then you kind of have your document. Okay, I have this setting all figured out. And then whenever you're writing in that setting, you can pull that document up, and you're not going to say word for word what you wrote there, but every once in a while, you're just going to throw in a splash of setting here and a splash of setting there as your characters move through the location. So that is kind of how I approach my research to the setting before I start writing. So I have a pretty good idea before I even sit down and start writing on the first page.